Thanks again for having me here. I am Theresa Mitchell with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. I also have Seth Ballhorn on the call. He's my external affairs coordinator, and he's going to be here to answer questions as well. I'm going to go through about 30 slides, lickety split fast, to leave time for conversation. So I would ask that you hold questions to the end or put them in the chat even. That might be an easy way to keep track of them. My partner at the Washington State Department of Transportation Olympic region is Bill Elliott. He was unable to come today, but he did share, allow me to share his slides with you all. I won't be able to answer specific WashDOT questions, but we can get those documented and get responses to you as needed. So I've modified the presentation that we gave to the public about 2 weeks ago, and as we updated them on our design progress, and an outcome of that was that article in the in the Leader, and that was in your read ahead. So hopefully you've seen that, and we were really grateful to have that front page slot in the newspaper. So with that, I will start going. Maybe. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to give you some background about why and who, and then more about how and when later in the slideshow. So the first question I like to answer for folks is, why are we focused here? And really that's because we have entered into a federal state partnership with the Army Corps of Engineers to share the costs of estuary restoration in an area that the Army Corps has determined is nationally significant. Now that national significance is the Puget Sound area, generally all the inland waters of salt waters of Washington State, but I call that Puget Sound. I know Hood Canal is not technically Puget Sound to some people, but for my purposes, it is. So that's really important. It's a nationally significant area for aquatic ecosystem restoration. In the little bubbles, I populated the logos of our partners. So as I mentioned, the Army Corps and the Department of Fish and Wildlife have entered into a cost share arrangement to execute this project. We've also partnered with the Hood Canal Salmon Enhancement Group and the Washington State Department of Transportation for this project. Certainly, those are not the only people providing input and being involved in the project. The other smaller bubbles just indicate all the variety of other folks at the county, the state, the federal partners, the tribes, the nonprofits, and others that have been engaged in this project over the years. So the next question is, why are we restoring estuaries? And the answer to that is, as we've analyzed the Puget Sound nearshore earlier on in the project, this project started in 2001. So we've been at this for 20 years, evaluating the problems and opportunities with the Puget Sound nearshore. We've determined that 55% of the historic tidal wetlands, so where tides and saltwaters, estuaries, where all of that stuff meets, have been lost since the late 1800s. So this little pie chart kind of represents the blue is the remaining acres and the gray are those lost acres. And I think if you think about some of those big river estuaries in Puget Sound, if you think about the Puyallup River in Tacoma, or you think about the Duckabush River in Seattle, like those estuaries are unrecognizable as estuaries and providing habitat. And what habitat do they provide? Well, these places where saltwater and freshwater meet provide habitat for fish, birds, shellfish, and wildlife. They contain a lot of important nutrients that support those fish and wildlife and the food web in general. They're a great place for naturally filtering out water pollutants to increase water quality. And they actually provide a good benefit for extreme events such as those king tides that we see, and also some resiliency to climate change. The vegetation that grows in these estuaries does that naturally for us. So when I look at the Duckabush Estuary, and I apologize, I assume that you all know where it is, but I should probably step back and just say we're on the west side of Hood Canal, part way up, just south of Brennan. So if that helps you all, apologies for not putting that in. When I look at the Duckabush Estuary, I see opportunity for improvement. This isn't a Puyallup estuary. This isn't a Duwamish estuary. This is the Duckabush, and it's not used by other land use needs like agriculture or a port or something like that. It really is pretty much in its original condition, with the exception of the highway that has been built across the estuary. So I've highlighted that here in red in case you couldn't see it. That's US 101, and it has 2 openings across the estuary to allow the river to come out. The project would address the highway and other features associated with the highway that have disconnected the river channels and alter the water and sediment movement within the estuary, that therefore has changed the way the habitat has developed here. And I've put some yellow circles to show, we've got some bridges that are locking the river in place. We've also got several places indicated by the blue lines that shows where channels have been completely disconnected by the installation of the highway. So that water and sediment is no longer flowing through the highway in those locations, or they've been put into culverts so small that they've significantly altered the way that that water and sediment can move through the estuary. We've done a little bit of poking around, and WashDOT has dug out some really great historical photos. And what these photos show is that that fill that was placed in the estuary that supports US 101 is really high. And you don't really notice this when you drive along 101 because you're driving on top of it. You don't really see what this is actually doing to the estuary, what it looks like from the estuary level. But there is a lot of fill, about 12 feet high. Maybe at this end, it looks like even higher than 12 feet high of fill placed in the estuary to support the roadbed. And here's another great historical photo. So this is what I call the flat bridge, and it's on the northern side of the estuary. You can see behind it, if I grab my laser pointer here, the old roadway is behind the existing in this photo, and you can see a little bit of Pierce's Resort, which was a historical settlement in the area, and some type of barn structure back here in the distance. None of these features, the road or the buildings, are in place today. But we do still have the current flat bridge and all of the fill and all of this. This is sackcrete. For those of you not familiar with that, it's bags of concrete. When it gets wet, it just hardens into like a armor bulkhead of sorts. So when we think about how to address the estuary and get it back to a more naturally functioning condition, a lot of people wonder what does that mean and how do we know what that looks like? And we use things called the historical T-sheets to help us understand what the conditions were before a lot of development was put in place. So this is from 1883. It's from the US Geodetic Survey, I believe. You can see the Pierce's Resort is already in the area at late 1800s, but there is no roadway documented across the estuary at this time. You can see where they put mapped channels and mudflats, salt marsh features. We also have some plans from the Department of Highways circa 1931 when they were about to install what is the current US 101 alignment. So the US 101 alignment is this line here. The old road that we can see in the historical photo is this alignment back here. And this gives a very detailed understanding of what the channels and the connectivity used to look like in the estuary before all of the fill and US 101 was installed. We've also done a considerable amount of work to collect data at this site. So that's what we've been doing since about mid to late 2019. So one of those things that we collected was LiDAR imagery, and it also gives us another good idea of where the current channels are, but also it gives you a peek into where those historic channels were. And one thing that's really obvious in this LiDAR imagery, if you can't see it, is the trapezoidal fill that supports US 101 going across the estuary. And that the river is confined to those 2 places to go out into Hood Canal. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit on that LiDAR imagery. And of course, as I zoom in, it gets a little blurry, so I apologize for that. In addition to the fill that the highway is on, there are these purple features that are kind of highlighted in purple. These are what I call training berms or levees to keep the river pointed underneath the bridge and out into Hood Canal. You'll notice that there are training levees on the main channel of the Duckabush River, but not on the north channel. The blue arrow here indicates kind of traditionally the volume of flow that goes through the channels. So historically, the main channel took most of the flow and the north channel had a lesser amount of flow, which is probably why we don't see those training berms on the north channel directing the flow under US 101. As we've analyzed this site over the last several years, we've noticed a few things. The first is that the North Channel is actually taking on more of the flow than the South Channel. And so I think you can very quickly see where this is going, is that with increased flow and under higher velocities, we're seeing that north bank of the North Channel starting to erode more. And this is that sackcrete protection underneath the flat bridge. It's slumping in. You can see active erosion occurring on this bank of the North Channel. Another thing we've noticed is that as the river is coming along here, it's taking a hard turn. It's hitting the end of this training berm, and it's having to take a turn, and it's pointing it into the other training berm. So if we take a look at some pictures, this is me standing on the end of that north berm, just looking up where the orange line goes, and you can see the river is actually off to the right. It's on the other side of the berm where we maybe don't want it to go in the long term. And then from the same kind of vantage point, looking over to the other levee, we are seeing levee erosion of that levee. So there are several things that we've observed as we're preparing for this project that make us realize that if this project isn't done, at some point in the future, there may be some problems that 101 experiences that WashDOT will have to address. I don't think any of these right now are current problems, but I think it's a sign of what could come if nothing happens at this particular location. So after all of that, the question is, so how do you fix this? How do you restore the estuary and better the habitat and improve the conditions for the fish and wildlife? So this is our preliminary schematic of what that looks like. And I'm sure you can read the legend and kind of follow along, but I'll point things out so you don't have to do that. The orange lined area is existing 101, and the red are the existing 101 bridges. All of that structure would come out. We would remove the fill, the roadway, everything. We would have to build a new highway, which is shown by the light gray. That's a new 1,600-foot elevated structure across the entirety of the estuary. And the main reason for doing this, if this were strictly habitat restoration, we would take out the existing road, restore the habitat, and it would be a great project for habitat. But we are savvy enough to know that you cannot disconnect 101 at the Duckabush Estuary. It has to be maintained. This is a very important transportation corridor for the Olympic Peninsula, for the state as a whole, and it must be maintained. So the project includes moving and elevating 101 onto a estuary spanning bridge. The blue lines indicate where channels would be reconnected. So these are those historic channels that we could see in the maps and in that LiDAR imagery to reconnect the river to its floodplain and create more habitat for the fish and the wildlife, especially endangered salmon will benefit from a project such as this. And let's see, we've got 3 culverts that will be addressed in the project footprint, one up here in the bridge approach, one that's a little bit off screen. I had to chop it off to make this image big enough for you to see, but there's one down at the south. And then actually one here on County Road on Shorewood Road that will be addressed as part of the project. And then last of the major components is making sure that we have parking for the public to access the river and tidelands. This is DFW, mostly DFW owned property as part of our North Olympic Wildlife Area. So making sure there's parking for people to access on both sides of the bridge. The stars here just indicate of our partners who's responsible for which project elements. So this is a effort that the Army Corps and the Washington State Department of Transportation will be working on together. Project benefits, kind of going back to why are we doing this? We're improving the habitat for fish and wildlife. That's our primary objective, to restore the lost tidally influenced wetland areas. We improve water quality. There's a variety of ways this project is doing that, and I can talk about that later if people have questions. Reducing the backwater flooding, the highway that's in place now on fill. When there's a flooding event, it's basically like a bathtub with 2 small drains. So this project will remove that bathtub effect and allow the floodwaters to pass out quicker. And then of course, this road was built in 1934. This would become a modernized highway design with meeting all of the current safety standards in place for roads, site distances, earthquake standards, everything that WashDOT is required to address when they put in a new highway. All right, moving on to some great stuff now. So what does that look like for the highway piece? So this is a slide that I got from Bill Elliott at WashDOT, and the main components that we talked about, they will build a new bridge across the estuary. So that's this outlined in blue. The bridge will need new approaches, and because the new highway is slightly offset from the existing alignment, the approaches are going to have to start offsetting from existing 101. So you can see the project limits as marked by the pink here. So we've got approaches on both ends, the culverts in the approaches that will be addressed. And then Duckabush Road that currently comes in right about here will need to shift over to give the proper site distance and safety for Duckabush Road to come into the new curvature of US 101. Moving along. So we have been lucky enough to partner with WashDOT's Visual Engineering Resources Group to give us some 3D imagery of what a post-project condition would look like. Keep in mind that this is still early level design. We're at about 30% design. So the final might look a little different than what we're seeing here, but this is what it looks like in general. You can see the elevated structure across the estuary. You can see the shifted Duckabush Road over here. There's a culvert here. The other one's off the screen, and there's another culvert up here. This is a profile view down at the bottom of your picture, just showing that like this is not on fill anymore. This is fully elevated over the estuary, and the water and sediment will be able to go wherever it chooses to go. This is an image of what the lane structure will look like, 12-foot lanes with 5-foot shoulders. This is an improvement over the existing conditions. Both of the bridges that are in place on 101 right now have no shoulders to accommodate bikes, and a very narrow walkway on some of the bridge's sides to accommodate pedestrians. So this will be uniform now across the entire estuary. This image shows what it will look like, the old elevation versus the new. So the new structure will be slightly higher than the existing structure, but not considerably. So that I was worried initially that we'd have a giant structure in the estuary, but that is definitely not the case. And one of the great things we've been able to include that the community really valued, we learned in our public meetings, was being able to incorporate a left turn lane from northbound 101 onto County Duckabush Road. So you can see what that visualization here. Excuse me. And with Duckabush Road shifting over, we'll be able to create a parking lot out of what is the current Duckabush Road area. All right, what do we have next? Excuse me. This is that same intersection, just showing that because US 101 will be higher, Duckabush Road will need to become higher to meet with it. Bad time for me to have a cough. And it will be increased 8 feet up in the air at the intersection point. Sorry guys, too much talking, not enough water. All right, I'm gonna try and push through this and not cough too much in your ear. So, US 101, super important, cannot be taken offline, must maintain throughout construction. That is one of our planning constraints. So the contractor will use a work area between the existing 101 and the new 101, where they will stage their machinery and build the new bridge. And US 101 will remain open throughout that portion of the work. There will also be these roadway approaches that we discussed. There will be, for a period of time, some alternating one-way traffic with temporary signal control to accommodate this amount of work. And then lastly, there will be, I think, 2 nighttime closures for final tie-ins, but I will have to defer to WashDOT for what that is. But we have carefully planned this project to reduce the amount of impact to transportation as best as we could. So this is what it will look like once 101, the new bridge, is finished. The old one will still be in place until it is removed. So this is just a good overview of what the condition will look like for a while until the removal of the existing highway begins. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, this project benefits habitat. And one of the species that will benefit from this improved habitat are, actually two of the species are Endangered Species Act listed salmonids. So Hood Canal summer chum and mid-Hood Canal chinook. These guys are very dependent on the estuary for a portion of their life cycle. Things like water temperature, salinity, the size, shape, and volume, the complexity of the habitat, and the availability of prey is really important to them in an estuary. And the reason for that is pretty simple. These fish come out of the rivers really small, and they transition from freshwater to saltwater and go on their way. They need a place to stop and get big and to do that physiological transition so they can survive in the new saltwater conditions that are not like what they were born in the freshwater. So the more habitat, the better habitat, the more suitable that habitat is for them to rest, to eat, to hide from predators, allows them to get bigger and stronger and transition out into the saltwater as a fish that has a higher likelihood of surviving that and returning to the river to spawn. So estuaries are very important for fish, especially these ESA listed species. So this will be a huge help to these particular species. Also noting that elevating the structure over the estuary creates essentially a wildlife underpass. So the elk population that we've got in this area, any deer, bear, smaller wildlife, squirrels, raccoons, whatever it may be, they will now not have to cross over the highway to get from one side to the other. They will be able to cross under, and that will reduce the likelihood of vehicle wildlife interactions in this stretch of highway. Okay, I'm going to roll into schedule and funding really quickly here. I'm checking the time, it's tight. Okay. So design phase is approximately 3 years. We are here in the black bubble. We expect about a year more of design and be completed with design before the turn of the calendar year to 2023. We have full funding in hand to complete design. We are just pushing forward and getting that work done. There will be a period in which we need to secure the funding to proceed with construction, and then construction phase would be about 3 to 4 years in duration. We don't know yet when that will start. That will depend on when funding is secured and all of the lands for the project are secured. I said earlier at the presentation, this is a cost share with the Army Corps of Engineers. So when we partner with them under their Aquatic Ecosystem Restoration Program, they will be able to put about 40% of the funding into the project. And there are certain project elements that the Corps doesn't cost share. So in this particular project, the bridge, the new 101 bridge, is one of those elements that their policies do not allow them to cost share. So it puts a little bit more of the cost on the state side, which is indicated by the green. So that's roughly the breakout of how the federal versus the non-federal. And when I say non-federal, it's up to DFW to get that 60% of funding. When we break that out, DFW has about a $50 million need to complete this project. And about 93% of that $50 million is the new highway and bridge. And so that is our current problem statement that we are actively working. We have a state capital supplemental budget request in this year for that $50 million to complete this project. And on the federal side, the feds are also requesting their funding for the project, either through the infrastructure bill or their annual work planning process, whichever happens to materialize first. So I guess this is really my last slide. My takeaway for this group is we need all the help we can get to fund the state portion, the $50 million ask for the construction phase of this project. It is a very large ask for a capital budget. You'll notice I say capital, not transportation. This is not a WashDOT project. It is not in their work plan. It's not a chronic environmental deficiency. This is an ecosystem restoration project, and it is being put forward by DFW into the capital budget. So just to summarize that, cost sharing it, federal responsibility is about 30 million, state about 50 million. And we're looking at the capital budget. We would appreciate any help or support we can get to help us get through the supplemental session successfully, and open to any ideas or thoughts you have about how to do that. So I will stop talking. I've talked a lot. Please ask questions, and I'm happy, or Seth and I are happy to answer them.
Yes, thank you very much, Theresa. It was very informative and very complete. Appreciate your presentation. Lindsay, do you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, I had a question about the those channels. It looks like they've been locked in place for about 90 years, and I would assume that they've incised and are probably below the overall height of the estuary floodplain. Is that the case? And if so, are there any parts of the project to try and reconnect them with the estuary floodplain?
So that's a really interesting question. I would say in general, we're not seeing incision of the channels, and that's just because of the amount of sediment coming down the river. So historically, before the highway was put in place, as the river flows and floods, that sediment kind of spreads out and can go wherever. Now it's being confined to the two channels. So we're actually seeing, and the reason why the flow is going more northerly now is we're seeing a lot of sedimentation and rising of the elevation of the channel. So I think it's almost opposite in most places of what I think I heard you say. The channel excavation work that is happening, and let me see if I can get to a slide that might show that a little better. This image, you can't see it because of the tidal elevation we projected, but there is a channel here. Let me switch to pen. So we're connecting this channel here, this channel here, this channel here, and this channel here. There was an idea to also connect this, but through our evaluation over the last couple of years, realizing that north channel, that connector is doing fine on its own. So that will not be part of the project anymore. So I don't know, to answer your question maybe more concisely, most of the excavation will be just through these areas where the existing 101 is, and making sure we're connected, and then to keep our footprint out of the estuary as much as possible, not really getting out there and digging anything to any specific elevation beyond what we're doing in the 101 footprint.
Thanks.
Are there any other questions? Raise your hand or speak. Anne, oh, please.
Is there any opportunity with residual funding, I know that's a funny word, to support fishermen or other local population at the base of the bridge for access at this point to fishing, for example?
One of the discussions that's being had now that we're past kind of at that 30-35% design milestone is including a hand boat launch in the area somewhere, but there wouldn't be a any kind of boat launch paved or any structure like that. But to the extent that we can accommodate hand boat launching, that seems at this point likely. I don't want to promise it because we're not at that point in design.
Thank you, Kate, and then Wendy.
Great. Hi, Theresa. Nice to see you. It's really exciting to see the work that's been done since we were last briefed on this. This project is, probably one of the largest projects that we will see in Jefferson County and have seen for some time. I actually first heard about it in Washington, D.C. I think you were maybe even there, Theresa. And I said, what? You talking about my Jefferson County? And I think what struck me most was that I did not realize so much work went into identifying this estuary as highly productive. And there had been a pretty extensive analysis of estuaries to identify some of the most critical, most pristine, highest impact of preserving them. And I was surprised that I was years into this position and across the country when I learned that. And it gave me such a new appreciation for this project. So I just wanted to insert that because it was a real aha moment for me.
Thank you. Wendy?
Hi, Theresa. It's good to see you again. Yeah, I wanted to follow up with you that one of the wildlife habitat issues is water quality. And do you have any more information about how this project is improving water quality for the aquaculture industry?
So yeah, making sure I have my mute off. Okay, yes, so water quality is definitely something that we expect will benefit as a result of this project. The primary reason for that, I'm gonna keep my pen, is that the current 101 has no water treatment on it, so anything on the road just washes into the estuary. The new structure will have collect water on it, and there will be a water treatment bioswale here and a water treatment bioswale here. So one on each end of the bridge. Bridge will have a high point kind of in the center. Water will run off each side in their collection and go into the bioswales in these locations. Couple other things just naturally, as we talked about functional estuaries and the vegetation and allowing the water to spread out, again, naturally filters some of the pollutants out of the water. So increasing that connectivity and the area that the water can go will help in that regard. And then there is some level of expectation that by reducing the backwater flooding effect that is experienced here, that fewer septic drain fields would be inundated or for not as long. And so to the extent that any of leaky septic systems are inputting into the water, that would be reduced or the duration shortened anyway, that might help with some of that water quality issue as well. So there's a couple of different ways that we're tracking that water quality is expected to improve as a result of this project.
Thanks for your thorough answer. That's very cool.
Thank you. Thera?
Yeah, earlier in the meeting, we talked just real briefly about resilience. And so this is for Theresa. One of my thoughts was that on your slide where you have about the project benefits, if you could fit another bullet, you clearly, like you could see through the work that you all have done that this was going in time, this was going to erode 101. And by elevating it and getting it up and removing that, I think resilience is definitely a function of this, increasing the resilience of the 101 corridor. And with the emphasis, like Secretary Buttigieg just released within the last few days, the climate action plan for US DOT. And I know that capital funding is more than just transportation, but certainly on the transportation side, resilience is a huge emphasis of the stuff that of the funding that's going to be released soon. So, and then just to the policymakers, this is a great example of how fixing a problem, like this, the estuary problem actually has long-term benefit for 101 and the resilience of that corridor. So just these are small little ways that we'll start thinking about resilience differently in the future. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? I know I very much appreciated the presentation. It was very thorough, very articulate. Theresa, you did an exceptional job, so thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Okay.